There is a particular terror that visits us in the stillness of familiar rooms, though we rarely name it. It arrives not with fangs or flames, but with the gentle whisper of routine, the soft embrace of predictability, the warm cocoon of safety that slowly transforms into something far more sinister. You who have felt the weight of your own walls pressing closer each day, who have noticed how the world beyond your threshold has become increasingly foreign, increasingly threatening. You are not imagining the shift. Something is happening to you, something ancient and primal, and it is not merciful. When I speak of the comfort prison, I do not speak merely of physical spaces or social anxieties. I speak of a psychological architecture that builds itself around us, brick by brick, choice by choice, until we find ourselves architects of our own confinement. This is not about laziness or weakness or the simple preference for solitude. No, this is about the slow alchemy by which safety becomes stagnation, by which protection becomes paralysis, by which home becomes tomb. The modern soul has crafted for itself the most sophisticated form of imprisonment ever devised. Unlike the dungeons of old, this prison comes with entertainment systems, food delivery services, and the illusion of infinite connection through glowing screens. It promises comfort while delivering numbness, offers security while stealing vitality, provides shelter while eroding the very essence of what makes us human. And the most terrifying aspect of this prison is that we hold the keys, yet we cannot seem to find our way to the lock. You must understand that comfort, in its purest form, was never meant to be a destination. It was designed as a brief respite, a momentary pause between the great adventures of existence, but we have elevated it to the status of a god, worshipped it as the highest good, built our entire lives around its pursuit. And in doing so, we have forgotten a fundamental truth that our ancestors knew in their bones. Growth lies only in the space between safety and danger, between the known and the unknown, between the comfortable and the terrifying. There is a patient I once worked with, a brilliant woman who had not left her apartment in over 2 years. She had constructed around herself what she called her perfect world. Everything she needed could be ordered, delivered, streamed, or downloaded. She worked remotely, socialized digitally, even found romance through applications designed to simulate connection. By every measure of modern convenience, her life was optimized. Yet she came to me because she was dying, not physically, but spiritually. She described her existence as feeling like she was slowly dissolving, becoming transparent, as if the world could no longer see her because she had made herself invisible to it. This is the paradox of the comfort prison. The more we insulate ourselves from discomfort, the more uncomfortable we become with ourselves. The more we avoid uncertainty, the more uncertain we feel about our own capacity to handle life. The more we retreat from challenge, the more challenged we feel by the simplest demands of existence. We think we are protecting ourselves, but we are actually weakening ourselves, like muscles that atrophy from disuse. But let me tell you what truly lies beneath this compulsion to retreat. It is not comfort we seek, but control. In our homes, we are gods of small kingdoms. We control the temperature, the lighting, the sounds, the interactions. Nothing unexpected can reach us without our permission. No one can demand anything of us that we have not already agreed to give. The world beyond our walls is chaotic, unpredictable, full of variables we cannot manage, and so we choose the known prison over the unknown freedom. Yet there is something the comfort seekers do not realize. The world they are avoiding is not separate from them. They are not observers of life, but participants in it, whether they choose to engage or not. Every day spent in retreat is a day the world moves forward without their contribution, without their voice, without their unique gift. They believe they are taking a break from life, but life does not pause. It continues its great unfolding, and they become spectators to their own existence. I have seen this pattern repeat itself in countless forms. The executive who works from home and slowly loses the ability to navigate office politics, eventually becoming unemployable in traditional settings. The student who chooses online classes exclusively and finds themselves paralyzed by the thought of walking across a physical campus. The parent who orders everything online to avoid the chaos of shopping with children, then discovers their children have no idea how to behave in public spaces. Each believes they are making life easier, but they are actually making themselves weaker. The comfort prison operates through a mechanism I call the shrinking world phenomenon. Each time we choose the easier path, our world becomes slightly smaller. Each time we avoid a difficult conversation, our capacity for authentic communication diminishes. Each time we decline an invitation because it feels too complicated or overwhelming, our social muscles atrophy a little more. And each time we tell ourselves we will re-engage tomorrow, next week, next month, we make tomorrow's engagement that much more daunting. This is not happening in isolation. The comfort prison is a collective phenomenon, a mass retreat from the messiness and uncertainty of genuine human experience. We are raising generations who are more comfortable texting than talking, more adept at virtual navigation than physical exploration, more skilled at managing digital personas than developing authentic character. And we tell ourselves, this is progress, evolution, the natural result of technological advancement. But what if it is actually regression? What if we are devolving into creatures of such exquisite sensitivity that we can no longer tolerate the basic conditions of human existence? There is a dream I must share with you, one that visited me repeatedly during my own period of retreat from the world. I found myself standing in a vast library, its shelves stretching infinitely in all directions. Every book contained a different possible life I could have lived, a different path I could have taken. But as I reached for book after book, they crumbled in my hands, turning to dust. A voice echoed through the library. These stories can only be read by living them. When I tried to leave the library, I discovered that the door had vanished. I had become so absorbed in the possibility of experience that I had forgotten to actually experience anything. The library was beautiful, safe, filled with infinite potential, but it was still a prison. This is the seduction of the comfort prison. It offers us all the appearance of choice without the risk of choosing. We can scroll through endless possibilities, research every option exhaustively, prepare for every contingency, but never have to commit to any particular path. We become experts on living without ever actually living, scholars of experience without ever experiencing anything genuinely challenging or transformative. The body knows what the mind refuses to acknowledge. When we spend our days in climate-controlled environments, moving from bed to couch to desk and back again, our nervous system begins to atrophy. We develop what I call environmental intolerance, an increasing sensitivity to temperature variations, weather changes, crowds, noise, unexpected stimuli. What was once normal human resilience becomes overwhelming challenge. A rainy day becomes cause for canceling plans. A crowded restaurant becomes an ordeal rather than a social experience. A delayed flight becomes a catastrophe rather than a minor inconvenience. But perhaps most insidiously, the comfort prison convinces us that our sensitivity is special, that our need for controlled environments is a form of self-care, that our retreat from complexity is wisdom. We develop elaborate philosophies to justify our limitations, turning weakness into virtue, avoidance into mindfulness, fear into preference. We surround ourselves with others who share our sensitivities, creating echo chambers where our restrictions are validated and our shrinking worlds are celebrated as conscious choices. I have watched intelligent, capable people slowly transform into creatures who cannot handle the basic friction of existence, They become unable to wait in lines, intolerant of service delays, panicked by technology failures, overwhelmed by social obligations that were once routine pleasures. They develop elaborate systems to minimize contact with uncertainty, then wonder why they feel increasingly anxious and depressed, despite having organized their lives to eliminate stress. The truth that emerges from this pattern is both simple and devastating. We have confused safety with aliveness, comfort with contentment, control with peace. We have built sanctuaries that have become sepulchres, retreats that have become prisons, homes that have become hiding places from the very life we claim to be living. There is a particular quality of suffering that belongs uniquely to the comfort prisoner. It is not the sharp pain of loss or trauma, but the dull ache of unlived life, the persistent sense that somewhere just beyond the walls we have built exists a version of ourselves that we have abandoned. This abandoned self haunts the comfortable spaces, whispering of adventures not taken, connections not made, risks not embraced. It is the ghost of our own potential, and it grows stronger with each day we spend in retreat. I once treated a young man who described his experience with remarkable clarity. He said he felt like he was living inside a snow globe, beautiful and contained, but fundamentally separate from the world that continued to swirl around him. He could observe life through the glass, but he could not touch it, could not be touched by it. And with each passing month, the glass seemed to grow thicker, the distance greater, until even the desire to break free began to fade. This fading of desire is perhaps the most tragic aspect of the comfort prison. We begin with genuine reasons for retreat, perhaps a difficult period, a loss, a disappointment that requires time to heal. But what starts as temporary refuge becomes permanent residence. The muscles of engagement atrophy not just in our bodies, but in our souls. We lose not only the ability to face challenges, but the appetite for them. The very idea of growth begins to feel exhausting rather than exciting. And yet, something within us knows we are dying by degrees. The comfort prison may silence many things, but it cannot silence the deep wisdom of the psyche that recognizes stagnation as a form of spiritual death. This knowing manifests in strange ways: restless dreams of being trapped, sudden moments of panic in our safe spaces, an inexplicable longing that seems to have no object. The soul speaks in symptoms when it cannot speak in words. There is a mechanism by which the comfort prison sustains itself that we must understand. Each time we choose the easier path, we tell ourselves a story about why this choice was necessary, reasonable, even virtuous. We become masterful storytellers of our own limitations. I work better from home, we say, even as our creativity withers in familiar surroundings. I'm being mindful of my energy, we explain, even as our energy diminishes from lack of challenge. I'm protecting my peace, we declare, even as that peace becomes indistinguishable from numbness. These stories are not lies in the conventional sense. They contain elements of truth, fragments of genuine insight, but they become dangerous when they transform from temporary explanations into permanent identities. When I need space to heal becomes, I am someone who needs to be protected from the world, we have crossed a threshold from which return becomes increasingly difficult. The modern world, with all its conveniences and technologies, has made the comfort prison easier to build and harder to recognize. We can simulate almost every aspect of human connection and engagement without ever leaving our controlled environments. We can work, shop, socialize, learn, even find love through interfaces that filter out the unpredictable elements of genuine encounter. And because we remain technically productive and connected, we do not see how profoundly we have disconnected from the raw material of human experience. But there is something that cannot be digitized, something that cannot be delivered or downloaded or streamed into our safe spaces. It is the irreplaceable alchemy that occurs when we encounter the world directly, when we allow ourselves to be surprised by life, when we engage with reality in all its messy, unpredictable, sometimes uncomfortable glory. This alchemy requires our physical presence, our emotional availability, our willingness to be changed by what we encounter. I think of the woman who realized she had not felt rain on her skin in over 3 years. She moved from heated car to climate-controlled building to temperature-regulated home, existing in a perpetual 72 degrees. When she finally stood in a thunderstorm, she wept, not from sadness, but from the shock of remembering what it felt like to be alive in a body, connected to the elements, part of something larger than her carefully controlled environment. The comfort prison operates through what I have come to understand as the illusion of infinite postponement. Tomorrow, we tell ourselves, we will re-engage. Next week, we will accept that invitation. Next month, we will take that trip. Next year, we will make those changes. But tomorrow never arrives, because tomorrow, we will still be the person who finds excuses to delay, reasons to wait, justifications for staying safe. The person who will take those risks exists only in our imagination, in some future version of ourselves that never materializes, because we are not doing the daily work of becoming that person. This postponement is not neutral. Each day we delay engagement with the world moves further away from us. The gap between who we are and who we could be widens. The distance between our current capacity and what life demands increases. What might have been a small step today becomes a giant leap tomorrow and eventually becomes a chasm too wide to cross. There is a patient who brought me a recurring dream that haunts me still. She stood at the edge of a diving board, looking down at water that seemed impossibly far below. Behind her, a line of people waited their turn, but they were not impatient. They were patient, understanding, supportive. They would wait as long as she needed. The water was warm, inviting, safe. There was no danger, no time pressure, no external force compelling her to jump. But she could not move. Not because she was afraid of the water, but because she had been standing on that board for so long that she had forgotten how to jump. Her muscles had forgotten the motion. Her mind had forgotten the possibility. Her spirit had forgotten the joy of falling. When she woke from this dream, she realized it was not about diving at all. It was about life itself, about the 1,000 small jumps we must make each day to remain fully alive, about the countless moments when we must choose between safety and growth, between the known and the unknown, between the comfortable death of stagnation and the uncomfortable vitality of engagement. The comfort prison promises us that we can have life without risk, growth without discomfort, connection without vulnerability. But these promises are fundamentally false. Life is risk. Growth is discomfort. Connection is vulnerability. When we try to extract the challenging elements from existence, we do not get a purified version of life. We get a simulation of life, a shadow of what we were meant to experience. And so we find ourselves in the strange position of being alive but not living, present but not participating, connected but not touching. We become tourists in our own existence, observing from a safe distance, but never fully entering the experience. We accumulate information about life without accumulating the wisdom that comes only from direct encounter with its challenges and uncertainties. The strangest aspect of this gradual retreat is how it disguises itself as wisdom. We tell ourselves we are becoming more selective, more discerning, more conscious of our choices. We frame our shrinking world as spiritual sophistication, our avoidance as mindfulness, our paralysis as preference. But beneath these noble narratives lies a more troubling truth. We are not becoming wiser. We are becoming weaker. We are not evolving toward higher consciousness. We are devolving toward smaller existence. There is a particular madness that afflicts those who have spent too long in the comfort prison. It is the madness of the connoisseur who has tasted so little that everything becomes too strong, too crude, too overwhelming for their refined sensibilities. The person who has eaten only bland food finds even mild spices unbearable. The individual who has lived only in silence finds normal conversation cacophonous. The soul that has known only comfort finds the texture of reality itself abrasive. I have witnessed this refinement into fragility in countless forms. The man who worked from home for 2 years and then found the fluorescent lighting of an office building physically painful. The woman who avoided crowds for so long that the sound of children playing in a park triggered panic attacks. The couple who ordered groceries online for months and then stood paralyzed in the produce section, overwhelmed by the simple act of choosing vegetables. These are not character defects or moral failures. They are the predictable results of a nervous system trained to expect only what it can control. But here is what we must understand. The nervous system that cannot handle stress cannot handle joy either. The psyche that has been protected from disappointment has also been protected from surprise. The heart that has been shielded from pain has also been shielded from wonder. When we narrow our tolerance for discomfort, we simultaneously narrow our capacity for all experience. We become like creatures adapted to deep ocean pressures who cannot survive in shallow waters, specialized for an environment so specific that any deviation becomes lethal. There's a dream that visits many who have lingered too long in the comfort prison. They find themselves in a house of infinite rooms, each more beautiful and perfectly appointed than the last. Marveling at the luxury wander from room to room, and the safety, the exquisite attention to every detail. But as they explore, they realize that each room leads only to another room, and another, and another. There are no windows to the outside world, no doors that lead anywhere but deeper into the house. The house is paradise, but it is also a labyrinth with no exit. The dreamer wakes with the terrible realization that they have been living in such a house for months, perhaps years, adding room after room of comfort while sealing themselves ever more completely away from the world that gave birth, each to them. This is the architecture of the modern retreat from life, not the simple cave or hermitage of the ancient mystic, but a sophisticated maze of conveniences that create the illusion of engagement while ensuring ever greater isolation. We can work without colleagues, shop without shopkeepers, socialize without vulnerability, learn without teachers, even love without presence. Each convenience removes another layer of friction, another opportunity for the unexpected encounter that might change us, challenge us, remind us that we are alive. The tragedy is not that we seek comfort. Comfort itself is not evil. The tragedy is that we have forgotten comfort was meant to be the pause between movements, not the movement itself. It was designed to restore us for engagement, not replace engagement. When comfort becomes the goal rather than the means, when safety becomes the destination rather than the launching pad, we have inverted the natural order of human existence. We have made the exception into the rule, the rest stop into the final destination. I once worked with a brilliant artist who had not shown her work publicly in 3 years. She had retreated into her studio, creating increasingly elaborate pieces that no one would ever see. She told herself she was protecting her art from commercial corruption, from the harsh judgment of critics, from the possibility of rejection. But as we explored her dreams and fears, a different truth emerged. She was not protecting her art. She was protecting herself from the possibility of being truly seen. The art had become a beautiful prison, and the studio had become her cell. This pattern repeats across every domain of human experience. The writer who polishes the same manuscript for years, rather than submit it. The entrepreneur who researches opportunities endlessly, but never launches a business. The romantic who cultivates elaborate fantasies about love but avoids actual relationships. Each believes they are being careful, thorough, strategic, but they are actually being avoidant, and their careful preparation has become a substitute for action rather than a foundation for it. The comfort prison operates through a mechanism I have come to call the atrophy spiral. Each retreat from challenge makes the next challenge seem more daunting. Each avoidance of discomfort makes discomfort more uncomfortable. Each choice of the familiar makes the unfamiliar more frightening. What begins as a reasonable response to temporary overwhelm becomes a permanent restructuring of our relationship to life itself. We do not simply become people who prefer comfort. We become people who cannot tolerate anything else. And yet, buried beneath all this careful construction of safety, something continues to stir. The soul has its own intelligence, its own compass, its own understanding of what it needs to thrive. It speaks through restlessness, through inexplicable longing, through dreams of freedom and flight. It manifests as sudden tears while watching others take risks we have forgotten how to take, as unexpected envy of those who seem to move through the world with ease we once possessed, as a persistent sense that we are living someone else's life, a smaller, safer, more contained version of the life we were meant to inhabit. The voice of the imprisoned soul is subtle but persistent. It whispers during the quiet moments when the distractions fade and we are left alone with the growing awareness that something essential is missing. It asks uncomfortable questions. When did I last feel truly challenged? When did I last surprise myself? When did I last do something that scared me in a good way? When did I last feel the particular exhaustion that comes not from depleting activities, but from expanding ones? These questions reveal the poverty of the comfort prison, even when it is furnished with every amenity. We can have perfect temperature control, unlimited entertainment, gourmet food delivery, and instant access to any information or connection we desire, and still feel profoundly empty, because what we are missing cannot be delivered or downloaded or purchased. What we are missing is the irreplaceable experience of meeting life on its own terms, of being shaped by encounters we did not orchestrate, of discovering who we are when we cannot control what happens to us. There is a particular quality of aliveness that emerges only when we are slightly beyond our comfort zone, when we are drawing on resources we are not sure we possess, when we are becoming someone we have never been before. This quality cannot be simulated or substituted. It requires our full presence in circumstances we have not arranged, our authentic response to challenges we did not choose, our genuine engagement with a world that will not bend to our preferences or protect our sensitivities. I think of the executive who took a sabbatical to write a novel and found himself paralyzed by the blank page, not because he lacked ideas, but because he had forgotten how to fail. His entire career had been built on managing risks, minimizing uncertainties, controlling outcomes. When faced with the fundamental uncertainty of creative work, the possibility that he might produce something worthless, that his efforts might lead nowhere, that he might discover he was not who he thought he was, he found himself unable to write a single word. The comfort of guaranteed success had robbed him of the courage necessary for genuine creation. This is perhaps the most devastating aspect of the comfort prison. It does not simply protect us from failure. It protects us from the possibility of success that requires us to risk failure. It insulates us not just from pain, but from the joy that can only be earned through difficulty, not just from loss, but from the love that requires vulnerability. Not just from uncertainty, but from the discovery that can only emerge through exploration of the unknown. The modern comfort seeker has become like a collector who owns thousands of postcards but has never traveled, who can describe in detail places they have never visited, experiences they have never had, emotions they have never felt. They mistake information for knowledge, simulation for experience, comfort for contentment. They have curated a life that looks perfect from the outside while feeling hollow from within. But there is something that cannot be curated away, something that cannot be controlled or managed or optimized. It is the fundamental wildness of existence, the unpredictable current that runs beneath all our careful constructions. This wildness calls to something equally wild within us, something that remembers what it feels like to be fully alive, fully engaged, fully present to the magnificent uncertainty of being human. The comfort prison cannot silence this calling indefinitely. It may muffle it, distract from it, provide temporary substitutes for it, but it cannot eliminate it entirely. Because this calling is not separate from us. It is us, the deepest part of us, the part that knows we were not born to be safe, but to be alive, not to be comfortable, but to be authentic, not to be protected, but to be powerful in ways we have forgotten we ever were. And so the question becomes not whether we will hear this calling, but when we will answer it. Not whether we will eventually face the limitations of our self-imposed prison, but how long we will wait before we begin the work of liberation. Not whether we will someday need to choose between safety and aliveness, but whether we will make that choice while we still remember what aliveness feels like, or whether we will wait until the memory has faded so completely that we no longer understand what we have lost. The path out of the comfort prison does not begin with grand gestures or dramatic transformations. It begins with something far more subtle and far more terrifying: the willingness to feel uncomfortable in your own skin, to sit with the restlessness that visits you in quiet moments, to acknowledge the voice that whispers you are meant for something more than this carefully curated existence, to admit that despite all your rationalizations, despite all your sophisticated justifications, something within you is slowly starving. There is a particular moment that arrives in every comfort prisoner's life, a threshold moment when the cost of staying becomes greater than the risk of leaving. For some, it comes as a sudden recognition while staring at their reflection, seeing a stranger who looks like a person who has forgotten how to live. For others, it arrives as a creeping awareness that years have passed without a single story worth telling, without a single risk worth taking, without a single moment that tested their capacity for courage. I recall a patient who described this moment with startling clarity. She was sitting in her perfectly organized living room, watching a documentary about mountain climbers, when she realized she could not remember the last time she had felt her heart race from excitement rather than anxiety. The climbers spoke of the terror and exhilaration of hanging from cliff faces, thousands of feet above the ground, and she found herself weeping, not from fear of their danger, but from envy of their aliveness. She had become so skilled at avoiding all forms of risk that she had also avoided all forms of genuine vitality. This recognition is both curse and blessing. Once you see the walls of your prison, you cannot unsee them. Once you feel the weight of your self-imposed limitations, you cannot unfeel them. The comfortable numbness that once protected you from awareness now becomes unbearable because awareness has broken through. You begin to notice how small your world has become, how predictable your days, how absent you are from your own life. But awareness alone is not liberation. Between recognition and action lies a chasm that has swallowed countless good intentions. The comfort prisoner who sees their cage but remains within it experiences a particular form of suffering, the agony of conscious confinement. They know they are dying by degrees, yet they cannot summon the courage to step into the uncertainty that freedom requires. They become archaeologists of their own entrapment, experts on every detail of their limitations, scholars of their own stagnation. This is where the most insidious aspect of the comfort prison reveals itself. It convinces us that understanding our situation is equivalent to changing it. We analyze our patterns, identify our triggers, map our avoidance strategies with scientific precision. We become fluent in the language of our own imprisonment, but analysis without action is merely another form of sophisticated procrastination. It gives us the illusion of progress while ensuring we remain exactly where we are. The truth is that liberation from the comfort prison cannot be thought into existence. It cannot be planned or strategized or optimized. It requires something that the modern mind has learned to distrust: the willingness to act before you feel ready, to move before you understand the path, to choose uncertainty over the familiar agony of limitation. It demands what I call the leap of uncomfortable faith. Faith not in a particular outcome, but in your own capacity to handle whatever unfolds. There's a dream that often visits those on the threshold of liberation. They stand at the edge of a vast forest. Behind them lies a well-lit path leading back to familiar territory. Ahead, the forest is dark, pathless, full of unknown sounds and unseen movement. They carry no map, no compass, no guarantee of safe passage. But as they stand at this crossroads, they begin to hear something emerging from the darkness. Not the sound of danger, but the sound of their own voice calling to them from somewhere deep within the trees. The voice says only this: "Come home." This is the voice of the authentic self, the self that has been waiting patiently while you constructed your elaborate defenses against life. It does not promise safety or comfort or ease. It promises only what the comfort prison can never provide: the possibility of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you have settled for being. This voice knows that home is not a place of perpetual comfort, but a state of authentic engagement with existence in all its uncertainty and possibility. The first steps out of the comfort prison are necessarily small, but they must be real. Not theoretical steps, not intended steps, not researched steps, but actual movements from the known toward the unknown. Perhaps it is accepting an invitation you would normally decline. Perhaps it is walking outside without checking the weather first. Perhaps it is having a conversation you have been avoiding, or visiting a place you have never been, or attempting something you are not sure you can accomplish. These small steps reveal something crucial about the nature of courage. We think courage is the absence of fear, but it is actually the willingness to feel fear and move anyway. The comfort prisoner has learned to interpret any feeling of fear or uncertainty as a signal to retreat. But fear, when properly understood, is not a warning system. It is a guidance system. It points toward the very edges where growth lives, where possibility dwells, where the authentic self waits to be discovered. I worked with a man who had not driven on highways for over 5 years after a minor accident that left him physically unharmed, but psychologically shaken. He had convinced himself that city streets were safer, more predictable, more manageable, but avoiding highways meant avoiding visits to friends who lived in distant suburbs, declining job opportunities that required commuting, missing family gatherings that felt too complicated to reach. His world had shrunk to the circumference of surface roads, and with it, his sense of himself as someone capable of handling life's normal challenges. The breakthrough came not through analysis of his fears, but through a single decision to drive to his sister's birthday party. He did not wait until he felt ready. He did not research optimal routes or practice in empty parking lots or develop elaborate coping strategies. He simply got in his car one Saturday morning and drove. The fear was enormous, almost overwhelming, but so was something else he had forgotten existed: the profound satisfaction of doing something difficult because it mattered to someone he loved. This is the alchemy of authentic action. When we move through fear rather than around it, when we choose meaning over comfort, when we prioritize connection over control, something fundamental shifts in our relationship to ourselves and to life. We remember that we are not as fragile as we believed, not as limited as we assumed, not as powerless as we had come to accept. We rediscover the particular strength that emerges only when we are tested, the specific confidence that comes only from facing what we thought we could not handle. But liberation from the comfort prison is not a single event. It is an ongoing practice. Each day presents new opportunities to choose growth over safety, engagement over withdrawal, authenticity over image management. Each moment offers the chance to either reinforce the walls of our limitations or take another small step toward freedom. The prison does not disappear overnight. It dissolves gradually through the accumulated weight of countless small choices to remain present to life rather than retreat from it. There is a particular resistance that arises as we begin to reclaim our capacity for authentic living. The psyche that has adapted to limitation does not easily accept expansion. Like a muscle that has atrophied, our tolerance for uncertainty must be rebuilt gradually. The first attempts at broader engagement may feel overwhelming, even dangerous. This is normal. This is expected. This is not a sign that we should retreat, but evidence that we are finally moving in the right direction. The comfort prison taught us to interpret discomfort as danger, challenge as threat, uncertainty as emergency. But as we slowly expand our capacity for authentic engagement, we begin to distinguish between different types of discomfort. There is the discomfort of growth, which feels uncertain but alive, and the discomfort of stagnation, which feels safe but deadening. There is the anxiety of possibility, which energizes even as it frightens, and the anxiety of limitation, which depletes even as it soothes. Learning to navigate these distinctions is perhaps the most crucial skill for anyone seeking to escape the comfort prison. The body becomes our guide, not through the elimination of uncomfortable sensations, but through the development of wisdom about what different sensations mean. The tight chest of excitement feels different from the tight chest of panic. The nervousness of anticipation has a different quality from the nervousness of dread. The fear that points toward growth carries a different energy from the fear that signals genuine danger. I think of a woman who had not attended social gatherings for months after a period of depression. She had convinced herself that solitude was healing, that she needed to protect her energy, that social situations were too draining for her sensitive nervous system. But as her depression lifted, she realized that her continued isolation was not protection. It was perpetuation of the very disconnection that had contributed to her depression in the first place. The first party she attended felt overwhelming. The noise seemed too loud, the conversations too fast, the energy too intense. Every instinct told her to leave, to return to the quiet sanctuary of her apartment. But she had learned to distinguish between the discomfort of growth and the discomfort of genuine overwhelm. This felt challenging but not dangerous, difficult but not impossible. She stayed for 2 hours, longer than she had planned, but shorter than she once would have managed, and left feeling not drained, but energized by the simple act of showing up authentically to her own life. This is what authentic re-engagement looks like. Not the elimination of discomfort, but the willingness to dance with it, to learn from it, to let it guide us toward the edges where aliveness lives. It means developing what I call discriminating presence, the ability to be fully present to our experience without being overwhelmed by it, to feel our feelings without being ruled by them, to acknowledge our fears without being paralyzed by them. The comfort prison promised us that we could have life without uncertainty, growth without discomfort, connection without vulnerability. As we liberate ourselves from these false promises, we discover something far more valuable. We can have uncertainty without catastrophe, discomfort without damage, vulnerability without violation. We can feel afraid and still act courageously. We can feel uncertain and still move forward. We can feel uncomfortable and still remain present to the beauty and possibility that exist alongside the difficulty. There is a moment in every liberation journey when you realize that the person you were afraid of becoming, someone who takes risks, who faces challenges, who engages authentically with an uncertain world, is actually the person you have always been beneath the layers of protective conditioning. The courage you thought you lacked was never missing. It was simply buried under strategies designed to keep you safe from a life that was never meant to be safe, only magnificent in its uncertainty and possibility. This realization brings with it a profound grief, not for what you have lost, but for how long you believed you were someone other than who you actually are. You mourn the years spent in retreat from your own power, the opportunities declined from imaginary limitations, the connections avoided from unnecessary fears. But this grief, when fully felt, transforms into something else. A fierce determination never again to abandon yourself to the seductive promises of the comfort prison. The liberated soul does not become someone who never feels afraid or uncomfortable or uncertain. They become someone who feels all of these things and continues to choose aliveness anyway. They develop what ancient wisdom traditions called the warrior heart, not the heart that seeks conflict, but the heart that meets life with courage, presence, and authentic engagement, regardless of what life brings. This transformation is not dramatic in the way movies suggest. There are no montages of sudden change, no moment when fear disappears forever, no final victory over uncertainty. Instead, there is the quiet daily practice of choosing growth over safety, of prioritizing meaning over comfort, of remaining present to life even when life feels overwhelming. It is the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 small acts of courage, each one teaching us something new about our capacity to handle whatever comes. And what comes when we finally step out of the comfort prison is not the catastrophe we imagined, but life itself, messy, unpredictable, sometimes difficult, often beautiful, always more interesting than anything we could have experienced from within our self-imposed limitations. We discover that the world we were avoiding was not our enemy, but our teacher, not a threat to our well-being, but the very source of our vitality. The comfort prison, in its promise to protect us from life's difficulties, had also protected us from life's gifts. As we reclaim our willingness to engage authentically with existence, we rediscover capacities we had forgotten we possessed, strengths we never knew we had, possibilities we could not have imagined from within our former limitations. We become archaeologists of our own potential, excavating abilities and dreams and courage that had been buried under years of careful avoidance. But perhaps most importantly, we remember what it feels like to be fully alive, not happy all the time, not comfortable always, not safe from every possible difficulty, but vibrantly, authentically, courageously present to the magnificent uncertainty of being human. We recall that we came into this world not to be safe, but to be real, not to be comfortable, but to be authentic, not to be protected, but to be powerful in ways we are only now beginning to remember. This remembering is not a gentle awakening, but a violent resurrection. The self that has been dormant within the comfort prison does not emerge quietly or politely. It erupts with the fury of life too long denied, with the passion of potential too long postponed. When we finally taste authentic engagement after months or years of simulated living, the contrast is so stark it can feel like awakening from a coma. Colors seem more vivid, sensations more intense, emotions more profound. We realize we have been living in a kind of sensory deprivation chamber, mistaking its muted existence for peace. I have witnessed this resurrection in countless forms, and it is always simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. There is the accountant who leaves his climate-controlled office building and stands in a thunderstorm, weeping at the sensation of rain on his skin. There is the writer who abandons her carefully scheduled routine and takes a train to a city she has never visited, just to remember what it feels like to be surprised by her own life. There is the mother who drops her children at school, and instead of returning to her predictable morning routine, drives to the ocean and sits on rocks she has not felt beneath her body in a decade. These moments of resurrection reveal something crucial about the nature of authentic living. It is not found in the grand gestures or dramatic transformations we imagine. It lives in the simple act of showing up fully to experiences we have been avoiding, of meeting life with our entire being rather than our carefully curated persona. The comfort prison taught us to experience life through filters, buffers, protective layers that promised to shield us from difficulty, but ended up shielding us from everything. But here is where the true challenge begins. The initial rush of liberation, the intoxicating taste of authentic engagement, is easier than what follows. Because once we have broken free from our self-imposed limitations, once we have remembered what aliveness feels like, we must learn to sustain that engagement in a world that constantly invites us back into comfort, back into safety, back into the familiar numbness we once called peace. The comfort prison does not simply exist in our homes or our routines. It exists in our minds, in our habits of thought, in our reflexive responses to uncertainty. We can change our external circumstances while carrying the prison with us wherever we go. Liberation is not a destination we reach, but a practice we embody. Not a problem we solve, but a way of being we must choose again and again, moment by moment, choice by choice. There is a patient who described this ongoing challenge with remarkable insight. She had successfully expanded her world, accepting invitations she once would have declined, taking trips she once would have avoided, engaging in conversations she once would have found too overwhelming. But she noticed that even as her external life became richer, more varied, more challenging, part of her remained vigilant for opportunities to retreat. At the first sign of difficulty or discomfort, her mind would begin constructing elaborate justifications for why this particular challenge was unnecessary, why this specific discomfort was unhealthy, why this moment of uncertainty was too much to handle. This is the subtlest and most persistent aspect of the comfort prison, its ability to reconstitute itself within whatever circumstances we create. We may leave our physical isolation, but carry emotional isolation with us. We may expand our social circle, but maintain psychological barriers that prevent genuine intimacy. We may travel to new places, but bring our familiar patterns of avoidance with us. The prison adapts, evolves, finds new ways to promise safety while delivering stagnation. The only antidote to this adaptive imprisonment is the development of what I call conscious discomfort tolerance. This is not the masochistic pursuit of pain for its own sake, but the mature recognition that discomfort is often the price of admission to everything we actually want from life. Real intimacy requires the discomfort of vulnerability. Meaningful work requires the discomfort of uncertainty. Authentic self-expression requires the discomfort of potential rejection. Personal growth requires the discomfort of discovering we are not who we thought we were. Learning to tolerate discomfort consciously means developing a different relationship to the sensations and emotions that the comfort prison taught us to avoid. Instead of experiencing anxiety as an emergency requiring immediate escape, we learn to experience it as information about our proximity to growth. Instead of interpreting uncertainty as danger, we learn to recognize it as the natural state of anyone who is expanding beyond their known capabilities. Instead of treating challenge as punishment, we learn to welcome it as evidence that we are finally living rather than merely surviving. This shift in relationship to discomfort is perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of liberation from the comfort prison. It means we no longer organize our entire lives around the avoidance of difficult feelings. We no longer make major decisions based on what will minimize uncertainty or maximize comfort. We begin to make choices based on what will maximize aliveness, authenticity, growth, connection, meaning, even when these choices guarantee discomfort along the way. I think of the executive who realized that his corner office, with its commanding view and climate-controlled perfection, had become a kind of sensory deprivation chamber. He began taking his meetings in conference rooms with windows that opened, scheduling walking meetings in nearby parks, deliberately choosing restaurants for business lunches that were loud, unpredictable, full of the kind of sensory chaos his office was designed to eliminate. His productivity did not suffer. It increased. His creativity did not diminish. It flourished. His stress did not multiply. It transformed into the kind of energizing challenge that reminded him why he had chosen his profession in the first place. This is the paradox that the comfort prison obscures. Engaging authentically with life's uncertainties does not increase our suffering. It transforms our suffering from the dull ache of unlived life into the sharp clarity of conscious engagement. The discomfort of growth feels entirely different from the discomfort of stagnation. One energizes even as it challenges. The other depletes even as it soothes. But perhaps the most profound transformation that occurs as we liberate ourselves from the comfort prison is the discovery of our own resilience. The self that has been protected from challenge has no evidence of its own strength. The psyche that has been shielded from difficulty has no knowledge of its own resources. The heart that has been guarded from potential pain has no sense of its own capacity to heal and grow in love despite uncertainty. When we finally allow ourselves to face the challenges we have been avoiding, we make a startling discovery. We are far more capable than we believed, far stronger than we assumed, far more resilient than we ever imagined possible. This discovery does not come through positive thinking or affirmations or visualization exercises. It comes through the lived experience of handling difficulty with grace, of facing uncertainty with presence, of meeting challenge with courage we did not know we possessed. There is a dream that often visits those who are in the process of reclaiming their authentic power. They find themselves in a vast library, but instead of books, the shelves are filled with mirrors. Each mirror shows a different version of themselves: the self who takes risks, the self who speaks truth, the self who loves without guarantee, the self who creates without permission, the self who lives without apology. As they move through this library of possibilities, they realize that every reflection is actually them, not potential selves they might become, but authentic aspects of who they have always been, waiting patiently to be claimed. This dream points to a truth that the comfort prison works tirelessly to obscure. We are not limited beings who occasionally access strength and courage and creativity. We are inherently powerful beings who have learned to limit ourselves. We are not naturally fragile creatures who need constant protection from life's difficulties. We are resilient souls who have been convinced to live as if we were made of glass. The process of liberation involves not the acquisition of new capacities, but the reclamation of capacities we never actually lost. We do not need to become brave. We need to remember that we were born with courage. We do not need to develop resilience. We need to stop undermining the resilience that is our birthright. We do not need to learn how to handle uncertainty. We need to recall that uncertainty is the natural habitat of every living thing. This reclamation is not a psychological process, but a spiritual one. It requires not just the understanding of our patterns, but the willingness to step into an entirely different way of being in the world. It demands what mystics have always called surrender, not the passive surrender of defeat, but the active surrender of our need to control outcomes, to guarantee safety, to eliminate uncertainty from our experience. When we surrender the impossible task of making life predictable, we discover something remarkable. Life becomes more interesting, not more difficult. When we stop trying to eliminate challenge, we find that challenge becomes a source of vitality rather than a threat to our well-being. When we cease our exhausting efforts to control every variable, we uncover energy we never knew we had for engaging authentically with whatever actually unfolds. There is a particular quality of presence that emerges in those who have successfully liberated themselves from the comfort prison. They carry themselves differently in the world, not with the rigid tension of someone braced against potential threat, but with the fluid readiness of someone prepared to dance with whatever comes. They have developed what warriors of old called relaxed alertness, the ability to be fully present and responsive without being anxious or defensive. This presence is magnetic in ways that comfort-seeking never is. People are drawn to those who embody authentic engagement with life because such individuals radiate a quality that has become rare in our overprotected culture: aliveness itself. They serve as unconscious reminders of what we all could be if we stopped organizing our existence around the avoidance of discomfort. But this transformation is not without its costs. Those who liberate themselves from the comfort prison often find that their relationships change in ways they did not anticipate. Friends who bonded over shared limitations may feel threatened by growth that exposes their own stagnation. Family members who enabled protective patterns may resist the changes that challenge their own comfort with familiar dynamics. Partners who shared a mutual commitment to safety may find themselves on diverging paths when one chooses aliveness over security. This relational disruption is perhaps the most difficult aspect of liberation from the comfort prison. It reveals the extent to which our connections were based not on authentic intimacy, but on shared limitations, not on mutual growth, but on collective avoidance. When we begin to live more authentically, we inevitably challenge others to examine their own relationship to comfort and risk, growth and stagnation, aliveness and safety. Some relationships deepen through this challenge, evolving into connections based on mutual support for each other's authentic development. Others reveal themselves to have been built on foundations too fragile to support genuine growth. The person emerging from the comfort prison must learn to grieve these losses while remaining committed to their own expansion, to honor what was valuable in limiting relationships while refusing to return to limitation for the sake of maintaining them. I recall a woman who described this process as learning to love people enough to disappoint them. For years, she had maintained relationships through careful self-editing, presenting only the aspects of herself that others found comfortable, avoiding topics or activities or expressions of authenticity that might disturb the carefully maintained equilibrium of her social connections. As she began to reclaim her full self, she discovered that some people loved her enough to grow alongside her, while others loved only the carefully curated version she had been performing. This discovery, while painful, became the foundation for relationships of unprecedented depth and authenticity. When we stop performing comfort for others, we create space for others to stop performing comfort for us. When we cease our careful management of other people's reactions to our authenticity, we invite them into their own authenticity. When we model the courage to be real rather than safe, we give others permission to choose realness over safety as well. But the most profound relationship that transforms as we liberate ourselves from the comfort prison is our relationship with ourselves. The self that has been protected from challenge has remained largely unknown to itself. The psyche that has been shielded from difficulty has never discovered its own depths. The heart that has been guarded from potential pain has never learned its own capacity for healing and renewal. As we begin to engage authentically with life's uncertainties, we meet aspects of ourselves we never knew existed. We discover reserves of strength we did not know we possessed, creativity we had never accessed, wisdom that emerges only through direct encounter with challenge. We become archaeologists of our own potential, constantly surprised by what we uncover as we dig beneath the protective layers we had constructed around our authentic self. This ongoing process of self-discovery transforms our entire relationship to existence. Instead of approaching life as a problem to be managed or a threat to be defended against, we begin to approach it as a mystery to be explored, an adventure to be embraced, a gift to be fully received. We shift from the stance of a victim trying to minimize damage to that of an explorer eager to discover what lies beyond the next horizon. There is a particular moment that marks the completion of liberation from the comfort prison, not because the work is finished, but because the fundamental orientation has shifted permanently. It is the moment when you realize that you are no longer asking, "How can I stay safe?" but "How can I stay alive?" No longer wondering, "How can I avoid discomfort?" but "How can I remain present to whatever I feel?" No longer seeking, "How can I control outcomes?" but "How can I engage authentically with uncertainty?" This shift in fundamental questioning transforms everything. The energy that was once devoted to elaborate strategies for avoiding challenge becomes available for creative engagement with possibility. The intelligence that was once focused on predicting and preventing difficulty becomes liberated to explore and create and connect in ways that were impossible from within the comfort prison. The liberated soul does not become someone who never feels afraid or uncertain or uncomfortable. They become someone who has learned to feel these things fully while continuing to choose engagement over withdrawal, growth over safety, authenticity over image management. They develop what I call conscious courage, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger than fear, commitment to their own authentic unfolding, regardless of what that unfolding requires. This conscious courage is not dramatic or heroic in the conventional sense. It manifests in the quiet daily choice to remain present to life rather than retreat into familiar numbness. It appears in the willingness to have difficult conversations rather than maintain superficial peace. It emerges in the decision to pursue meaningful work rather than settle for comfortable employment. It lives in the choice to love deeply rather than safely, to create boldly rather than cautiously, to engage authentically rather than strategically. And in making these choices consistently, the formerly imprisoned soul discovers something that no amount of comfort or safety could ever provide: the deep satisfaction of living in alignment with their own truth, the profound peace that comes not from the absence of challenge, but from the presence of authentic engagement with whatever challenge brings. They learn that home is not a place of perpetual comfort, but a state of courageous presence to their own unfolding life. The comfort prison promised safety, but delivered only the illusion of safety, purchased at the price of vitality. True safety, it turns out, does not come from avoiding life's uncertainties, but from developing the capacity to meet those uncertainties with presence, wisdom, and grace. Real security is not found in controlling outcomes, but in trusting our ability to respond authentically to whatever outcomes unfold. This understanding marks the beginning of a truly liberated existence, not one free from challenge or uncertainty or discomfort, but one free from the exhausting effort to avoid these natural aspects of being alive. It is the start of a life characterized not by the absence of difficulty, but by the presence of authentic engagement with difficulty. It is the dawn of an existence defined not by what we avoid, but by what we embrace, not by what we fear, but by what we love enough to risk everything for. The former prisoner of comfort, standing now in the raw wind of authentic existence, faces a final and perhaps most crucial test. For liberation brings with it a responsibility that the imprisoned soul could never have imagined: the obligation to remain awake. The comfort prison, you see, does not simply release its captives and disappear. It lingers at the edges of consciousness, whispering its familiar promises, offering its seductive solutions to every moment of difficulty that authentic living presents. There is a particular vigilance required of those who have tasted freedom, a kind of spiritual alertness that must be maintained against the constant gravitational pull of old patterns. The mind that once organized entire days around the avoidance of discomfort does not simply forget these skills. The psyche that once found elaborate justifications for limitation does not lose its capacity for rationalization. The heart that once chose safety over connection does not automatically default to courage. This ongoing vigilance is not paranoia, but wisdom. It is the recognition that growth is not a destination, but a direction, not a problem solved, but a commitment renewed daily. The liberated soul must learn to distinguish between the voice of authentic intuition and the whisper of sophisticated avoidance. They must develop the capacity to recognize when legitimate self-care is becoming elaborate self-protection, when healthy boundaries are becoming prison walls, when reasonable caution is becoming paralyzing fear. I have witnessed countless individuals who successfully escaped their comfort prisons, only to discover that freedom required a kind of courage they had not anticipated: the courage to remain free. For there is something seductive about the simplicity of limitation, something almost nostalgic about the days when choices were made by fear rather than wisdom. when life was organized around avoidance rather than engagement. The complexity of authentic living, with its constant demands for presence and discernment and courage, can make the old prison seem almost restful by comparison. So we return to where we began. But we are not the same. The terror that once visited you in the stillness of familiar rooms has been named, faced, transformed. You who once felt the walls pressing closer, now understand that those walls were never made of brick and mortar, but of choices, of stories, of the accumulated weight of 1,000 small retreats from life itself. The comfort prison was real, but so is your capacity to walk free from it. The path forward is not a return to reckless abandon or the naive pursuit of danger for its own sake. It is the conscious choice to meet each moment with presence rather than protection, to engage with uncertainty rather than eliminate it, to choose aliveness over safety whenever these two ancient forces call you to decide. You are no longer the person who believes comfort equals contentment, who mistakes control for peace, who confuses stagnation with wisdom. Remember this: every day you choose growth over safety, engagement over withdrawal, authenticity over image management. You cast a vote for the person you are becoming rather than the person you have been. The comfort prison will always extend its invitation, will always promise relief from the beautiful difficulty of being fully alive. But you now possess something it cannot touch: the knowledge that you were never meant to be safe, only magnificent in your willingness to dance with whatever life brings. Step forward. The world is waiting for your authentic presence, your unrehearsed response to its mysteries, your courage to remain awake in the face of everything that seeks to put you back to sleep.